Beckett's a really interesting film, and so much of it depends on, John David Washington's performance here, and he really excels. It amazed me that, he was a football player for the longest time, because he's such a natural on camera, and he performs so great in this film. Can you speak to just working with him and how he was able to really carry that performance?
Well, working with him was easy because he first of all, reacted to the material, to the script, as instinctively he liked it. There was something about this character, and the fact that this character was somewhat of a normal person, and not a trained killer or anything of the sort, that resonated with him. And then we had the most beautiful meeting, and then as I was saying, it's easy to work with him because he becomes incredibly passionate, and like me, he becomes kind of obsessive almost. So our conversations about how to portray this character were long and of many different types, and stemmed from many different references that I put on the table, but whether it be movies or other things. And then he drew from his sports background in terms of this, the physical element, what you believe to be your limits, and then how instinct kicks in and fuels something that you were not expecting. All of those things are stuff that he absolutely um, brought enriched the character with, and including his background in sports. And having said that, to me, he's the most fine, absolutely meticulous performer. And we can tell also from the variety of movies that he makes, and the variety of characters that he portrays. To me, I was just lucky to work with him, and for him to have this sort of twofold performance, which is half the dramatic crisis that the character is going through, and the other half is the more physical aspect of the genre elements of the movie.
Something I really liked, and let me know if this was a creative choice. I'm curious here, but the Greek isn't subtitled, and it added a lot as an American, because I can kind of put myself in Beckett's shoes. Like, he's confused, he doesn't really know what's all going on, and that kind of adds to that dimension. But if you do, understand the language there, then you're getting a whole nother dimension to the film. So was that a creative choice, not the subtitle?
Absolutely. Again, the premise was to have a relatability with this character, somebody that you could almost feel like, what would I do in that situation? As opposed to the kind of superhuman, slightly elevated tone of other movies in this genre. I like the idea of experiencing it together with him, and that entailed both sort of discovering, elements of the plot of what is happening to him alongside him, and also not being able to decipher what people are saying in Greek simply because he doesn't speak Greek. And that definitely informed this subjective experience.
And I saw the script came from an idea from yourself. And Greece is such a beautiful locale through the film. We get to see so many great sights throughout. Why did you want to set it in Greece, and how'd you come up with this idea?
Well, the movie needed a couple of things, most importantly, and one was a country that was in a sort of turmoil, in a sort of crisis, that could stage, the things that happen in the plot, which I don't want to spoil too much, but that definitely had a moment of important protesting, of people, going in the streets to shout out what they're thinking. And then the other thing that we needed was a variety of rich landscapes, because of course the movie is on the road so much. And one way I thought to convey the sheer amount of travel that our character goes through was, to change up the landscape. And Greece has a mainland which is undiscovered in international cinema, basically, and which offers such a wide variety of rich, very dramatic landscapes. So it just was a perfect fit for what we were looking for.
Beckett, he gets beaten up during the film quite a bit. He gets shot, he gets stabbed, he gets tased, he's fallen from all kinds of sort of heights. How fun was it to get these stunts set up and the shoot these action scenes?
It was fun because we had such a peculiar character for the type of stunts that they were. He is, and we wanted to keep to maintain coherent this idea that he's not a trained fighter, so he will tackle fights as somebody who doesn't know how to fight would, and in a way clumsily. But then, of course, he also has this survival energy, which gives him that much extra energy. That said, we also wanted to keep track what happens to a person who goes through this stuff, and he sweats, he's in pain. We keep track of that pain. So all those things were made the stunt work that much more interesting because we kept track of the character and what he was going through as a real human being, as opposed to a superhuman hero of sorts who kind of shrugs it off and keeps running. And that the to top that off, John David basically wanted to do all of his own stunts, with the exception of a couple of things that were just too dangerous for him to do, which would have been a legal problem. He does everything, as you see in the film. He gets run over by a car, and stuff like that. So that made it that much more real when we were envisioning this physical toll of going through all those experiences.
Yeah, I loved how they were shot because, like you said, he's kind of an everyman character, and he's not falling like with grace. It's very rough. It's very fun to watch.
Yeah, this again, it was the central interest, in my opinion, is how does a person who is the way we present them in the beginning of the film, how does he get through such an extreme situation while also, dealing with his own personal crisis, and that this sort of prism informed so many things throughout the story, and even down to the way he falls. So it's very much an adventure as lived through Beckett.
And it's such an interesting story too because after the what happens in the beginning, Beckett's in a really rough situation, and he's looking at all these pills. He kind of doesn't really have that will to live, and then we see him go through hell and back to try to do something bigger than him, try to be selfless. Can you talk about that, him kind of finding that desire to live throughout the story?
Well, there is something interesting about his journey, which begins in a place where, as we meet him in normal life, and we do see this man who kind of lets life happen to him in a way. And it's interesting in the way that he is basically perfectly unfit to experience the stuff that goes on in the story. So, in a way, I find that the fact that he and the story being so opposite to each other, that clash, that intensity, definitely puts him in a place where he has to confront his way of being. And eventually, as we'll see later in the movie, I don't want to spoil too much, he becomes, inevitably, he decides that he needs to change that, and that inverts some of his energies in some very fiery ways, let's say.
The film, at times it has such a grim look at kind of like politics, and you're dealing with themes like fascism, there's corruption in different parts of the government, and then but there's also this hopeful human element to it. And it's maybe it's too simplistic to try to like boil it down to being gloomy or optimistic, but how do you kind of view the outlook of this film, just on society as a whole? Because it's very true to life, to where it's all over the place and it gives you a lot to think about.
Well, I wouldn't. I agree with you. It's not simplistic. There's this sense of let's say, distrust in some of our establishments, in some of what we perceive as the news, the real news, if that's even a thing anymore. And we do experience that nowadays. But what happens in the film to this character who is in a place where he's basically oblivious to what's going on. He's a tourist who doesn't really know what's going on in Greece. He meets people who are activists and who, with this pool of uh, confusion and national and international problems, they decide to engage in action, to organize, to find a spirit of let's be heard and engage. And they occupy streets and talk and scream and shout. And I guess in that way, yeah, I absolutely do believe that no matter what our premise or what our distrust, in that with that force of engagement, there can be a positive outlook. Absolutely.
Several scenes in the film, they're not really the key moments, but there's a couple scenes that feature animals. Do you like shooting with animals, or is it very difficult? I often hear that it's very hard to do.
It's extremely hard, but I love it anyway. I just find it to be, I don't know, there's something that you capture precisely because they're out of control, which is what's hard. There is something about capturing what animals do that feels that much more authentic and strong. Specifically, although I have worked with animals before, both in the stuff I've done before, with a fox. Actually, I used the same fox both in a short film I did and in my first feature. The same fox came back to shoot. But that said, when I went around Greece, I was just scouting for locations. I saw so many stray dogs. It was unbelievable. And they were just sort of roaming around doing their own thing, walking from town to town. And I felt, among the million other things we needed to be authentic, that we needed dogs in the movie. Otherwise, it wouldn't be believable. So, by any means necessary, we managed to get some in. And then a couple of others literally just walked in the shot. And surprisingly, the times when that happened was in Athens when we were shooting the rally scenes.
Yeah, that's so funny about the fox. I've heard of directors, working with the same actors repeatedly, but never the same fox. I think you might have said a first there.
Well, look, it served two different purposes in two different projects, but I had the collaborator already. This woman who works with animals and is great. I was like, why, we we go safe. We call her again, and it's perfect.
Awesome. And you worked as a second unit director on Call Me by Your Name, and that has been so well received and so beloved. A couple years removed from that, how do you look upon the legacy of that film? It rocketed Timothy. His career's just gone crazy since then. How do you look back upon that film and how it touched so many people?
Look, I have to say I did do second unit on that film, but it was very little. The movie was a small movie. I just did a couple of days of very simple things. That said, obviously the legacy of the movie isn't so far-reaching because of what the film represents, I think, and because it's an amazing works of craftsmanship. So the two things together make something that has an impact and then stays to the ages.
You've done a couple features before this. What was the biggest lessons you learned from your previous outings that really helped you with Beckett?
um I would say one thing is the importance of sleep. The other thing is to always make sure to have amazing collaborators that can bring everything you cannot think of. Because I worked years on this movie and I thought about everything that we could do to enrich it. But then from smaller projects I did before, I already noticed how much, no matter how much you prepare, if you have amazing collaborators by your side, not only do the more ambitious things, not only do they have that much more manpower and experience, but also ideas, things you couldn't think of, no matter how much you prepare, because they simply come from a different background, a different mind. And so I always find it interesting and crucial to find the best pool of people to work with, depending on what project it is.
And then my last question here, the film coming out on Netflix is so exciting. How do you feel that knowing that, so many millions of people will immediately have access to it rather than having to, buy a ticket per se? How exciting is it, that potential reach through a streaming partner?
Look, it's amazing because this is my second feature. My first feature was did a big festival tour, but was only released in Italy, and then on Mubi. And so, for my second feature to instantaneously have access to millions of people is basically unimaginable, and it's a privilege that I can't believe I have. So I feel like, also because of the moment we're living in, it's the most powerful tool I could ever imagine to have to host my film. It's amazing.